A man who lived alone for 12 years got a family of 5 by mistake at an auction. Wyoming, winter 1887. The wind howled across the flat land like it was angry. The sky looked like old metal. Marcus Stone rode into Cedar Ridge town with his coat collar up. He was 42 years old. His hands were rough from work. His eyes looked sad. He had been alone for 12 winters. His ranch sat east of town, hidden by old trees. Nothing grew right there since the night his barn burned down. The fire took his wife and son with it. Marcus came to town to buy a machine. It was an old grass cutter that once belonged to his father. The machine had iron teeth and wooden wheels. It was rusty, but he knew it well. It was auction day in the town square. Snow covered the streets. Farmers, traders, ranch hands, and some drunks looking for warmth filled the area. Marcus stood in the back with his arms crossed. His name was written in the auction book. He watched the bidding but didn't care about most things. He only wanted one item. But then something strange happened. The auctioneer shouted over the wind, "Marcus Stone, winning bid on lot 47. People turned to look. Marcus was confused. He hadn't raised his hand to bid. A horse-drawn cart moved forward. Inside sat a young woman, maybe 28 years old. She had brown skin and sat up straight despite the cold. She held 4 children tightly, 2 boys and 2 girls, all between 5 and 11 years old. The woman's dark eyes looked at the crowd with warning. "We're not property," she shouted. "We're people." The square went quiet. People began to whisper. A horse trader near the saloon laughed. "Looks like Stone's buying company for the long nights." An older woman pulled her shawl tighter. "God bless those poor things." On the courthouse steps, Mayor Garrett looked worried. He knew Marcus. He knew the rancher kept to himself. He knew this wasn't right. Marcus stepped forward slowly. "What the hell is lot 47? The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Service contract for domestic help. 3 months. That's what the papers say." Marcus stared at the woman. She didn't look away. One of the children, the smallest girl, peeked out from behind the woman's skirts. Her big brown eyes were wide with fear. For a moment, Marcus wasn't in the square. He was back in the barn with smoke choking the air. His boy's cries somewhere he couldn't reach. The pain in his chest felt like a second winter. The crowd was watching. He looked at the girl, then at the woman. He could walk away. He didn't. He stepped forward and placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "You're coming with me." She tensed but didn't pull away. He knelt in front of the little girl and handed her a folded handkerchief. It was faded blue cotton, worn soft. "It's clean. Keep it." The girl held it like a treasure. Whispers turned to laughter. The horse trader sneered. "Look at him playing hero." Marcus turned, his jaw set like stone. "Laugh all you want. They're under my roof now." He guided the 5 of them to his wagon. The snow crunched under their boots. Isabel, the woman, said nothing, but her eyes never left his face. The trail home was long and cold. Wind howled through the trees like wolves crying for something lost. Marcus sat silent driving the wagon. The wagon creaked under the weight of his new company. Beside him, Isabel held Rosa, the youngest girl, close under her shawl. Diego, Anna, and Miguel huddled in the back, too cold to speak and too scared to ask where they were going. They crossed the dry creek bed at dusk. Marcus's ranch rose through the frost and thin snow. What had once been a proud homestead now looked like a wounded animal. The barn still stood, but part of its roof had fallen in. The house, patched with different wood and windows darkened by soot, looked more like a memory than a home. Marcus helped them down one by one without speaking. Isabel's eyes swept across the land. She noticed the burned beams, the charred fence posts, the blackened tree stump near the barn that still smelled faintly of smoke even after 12 winters. Inside, the house was bare. A stove, a table, a bed in one corner, firewood stacked like discipline, not comfort. No lace, no curtains, just what was needed. Isabel unpacked flour and beans from her bag and moved toward the stove. Marcus didn't stop her. He sat on the porch steps, cleaning a horse's bridle with slow, careful strokes. His eyes drifted toward the barn, then away. While supper cooked, the children wandered quietly. Anna took a biscuit from the stove and hid it under her coat when she thought no one was looking. Miguel wouldn't come inside until Isabel coaxed him. Diego explored the area silently, eyes sharp like a coyote's. In the corner of the living space, Isabel found a broken picture frame tucked behind an empty crate. It held a burned photograph of a woman and a boy, both smiling. The boy's hair curled. The woman's face had Marcus's eyes. Isabel put it back carefully, but she became more guarded. When night fell, Marcus lit a single lantern. The fire in the stove warmed the room, but not the space between them. Isabel laid blankets near the fireplace. The children curled up, exhausted. Anna slept with one hand on the stolen biscuit. Outside, the wind changed. Marcus stood suddenly and crossed to the door. He opened it just enough to hear a distant snort. Hoofbeats, then nothing. He closed it again. Wild horse? Isabel asked quietly. He shook his head. Not wild. He stayed up late, sitting by the window, sharpening his old knife. The kind once used for hunting or defense. In the hours before dawn, he walked quietly to the small bed where Rosa slept. She shivered under a thin blanket, cheeks pink with cold. From a chest near his bed, Marcus pulled out a faded child's shirt. It was soft flannel patched at the elbows. He laid it gently across her body. "He'd want you warm," he whispered. Isabel stirred, watching him from the shadows. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered longer than before. Morning came grey and cold. Marcus made coffee strong enough to melt a nail. Isabel handed out breakfast in silence. Afterward, as Marcus cleared the table, something caught his eye. A small piece of bread, perfectly square, sat alone on the wooden surface. Not eaten, not forgotten. He looked at Anna. She looked away, her little hands gripping the hem of her coat. It wasn't an accident. It was a gift. A quiet apology from a girl who stole because hunger taught her not to trust. Marcus didn't speak. He just sat down with the bread in hand and stared at the window where snow touched the sill. Later that morning, he brought the children outside. "This here's a fence post," he said, handing Diego a hammer. "It holds the land in place." To Miguel, he gave a water bucket. To Anna, a loaf of dough and space beside the stove. To Rosa, a brush for the old mule. He did not smile, but something inside him, something buried with a boy 12 years ago, stirred. They were not his blood, but they were breathing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The snow melted slowly, showing patches of dry earth like old scars coming back after winter's silence. Life at the ranch settled into a rhythm, though no one called it peace yet. Each day began before light. Marcus chopped wood. Isabel started the fire, and the children, still careful, learned the steps of survival one quiet task at a time. Diego preferred silence and shadows, often watching from the fence line. Anna moved like a cat, with quick hands and quicker glances. Miguel flinched every time Marcus came near, though Marcus never raised his voice or hand. Rosa sang soft, bright songs in Spanish and broken English. Little notes floating over the prairie winds like they had somewhere better to be. One evening, while the wind pushed at the shutters and the fire burned low, Isabel sat beside Marcus after the children had fallen asleep. She held a tin cup of tea, her eyes distant. "I was engaged once," she said, "to a Union soldier. He died at Gettysburg. I waited years before someone told me." Marcus said nothing. "I found those children in an abandoned work camp near the border," she continued. "No names, no families, just scars. I could not walk away." Marcus looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. Not approval, not pity, just understanding. He took the children out riding 2 days later, one by one. The Wyoming wind bit through coats and skin, but the horses needed movement, and so did the souls in that house. Diego rode steady and still like he was born on a saddle. Anna shrieked when the horse trotted, then laughed louder. Miguel clung to the reins so tight his knuckles turned white, but Marcus never let go of the lead rope. And Rosa. She stood on the saddle while the horse walked, arms out like wings. That night, Wolves howled near the ridge. Marcus stood guard with his rifle. Isabel stood beside him with a kitchen knife. "They always come this close?" she asked. "Only when they smell change." The next afternoon, an old rider came up the hill. "Tom," Marcus muttered, lowering his saw. Tom got off his horse slowly. His mustache was white with age and weather. He looked past Marcus at the children chopping carrots by the porch. "You've got yourself a crowd," Tom said. Marcus didn't answer. Tom looked at Isabel, then back at Marcus. "Folks in town are saying things. That you took in someone else's mess. A Mexican widow and some strays." Marcus's jaw tensed. "They've got names. You just never asked." Tom grunted. "You always were stubborn. Just don't bring trouble to your doorstep." When Tom rode off, Isabel didn't speak. But Marcus saw the way she folded her hands tighter, like waiting for blame. He didn't give it. Later that night, while sharpening fence stakes with Diego, Marcus handed him a small, worn pocket knife. "You don't need words to make something strong," he said. Diego took it carefully, eyes wide. The jagged scar on his neck was barely visible under his scarf. Then, for the first time, he smiled. Just a flicker, but it stayed. That evening, Marcus returned from the barn to find something taped to his door. A piece of paper with rough edges and crayons. It showed a man with dark hair and a grey coat standing next to a crooked barn. Around him, 5 smaller figures, one holding a brush, one holding a loaf, one with a stick, one laughing, and one silent. Above it, in shaky handwriting, "Our house." Marcus stared at it for a long while. He didn't take it down. Inside, Diego sat beside the fire, carving a piece of wood with the pocket knife. Anna offered him half her biscuit. Miguel leaned against Isabel's side, not flinching. Rosa hummed the same tune as always. And Marcus, man of few words, fewer hopes, and more regrets than he'd ever admit, stood at the threshold of something he didn't know how to name. But maybe, just maybe, this time he would stay. Spring crept in quietly that year. The snow thinned, showing patches of wild grass, brittle and grey. The barn no longer smoked in Marcus's memory. Now it stood rebuilt, if not yet complete. The children tended goats. Isabel baked cornbread. Life in its fragile form was taking root again until the day the mayor came. Mayor Garrett arrived on horseback, flanked by 2 deputies with polished boots and clean coats. His presence, like a storm, made the wind go still. Marcus stepped off the porch before they could get down from their horses. "You rebuilding an orphanage, Stone?" Garrett asked, eyes scanning the porch where Rosa peeked around the doorframe. "I'm rebuilding my land," Marcus said flatly. Garrett smirked. "Town says you're housing unregistered dependents. No papers, no rights to stay." "They're not livestock," Marcus replied. "Law don't care if they're pigs or angels. No papers is no papers." Isabel stepped out beside Marcus, shoulders squared. "If we leave, will you leave him be?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "No one's leaving." Garrett got down from his horse, pulling a scroll from his bag. "You've got 30 days. This land, if it harbors fugitives, can be reclaimed by the territory." He handed the notice to Marcus. Then, with a smug nod, got back on his horse. "Maybe you're too soft to bury your ghosts, Stone. Just remember, Bryce doesn't forget what he pays for." That name chilled the air more than the wind. That night, as the house slept, Marcus walked around the property with his rifle. The stars were sharp and cold. The wind had turned strange, quieter, like it was listening. From the barn's shadow, something moved. He turned sharply. "Who's there?" A shape came forward. Tall, lean, reeking of sweat and tobacco. It was Bryce. His hat sat low over his eyes, one hand resting on the handle of a knife. "I came for what's mine," Bryce said, voice smooth as oil. "You bought a lie, Stone. That woman and those kids belong to me." Marcus raised the rifle. "Step 1 foot closer. You think the law will shield you?" Bryce laughed. "This land is lonely. Accidents happen." From the porch, Isabel's voice cut through the dark. "Then maybe you should be the one to fall first." Bryce turned. She stood holding a lantern, its light casting her shadow like a giant. In her other hand, she gripped a pot of boiling water from the stove. "She took my blade," Bryce growled, realizing too late the glint of his own knife in her belt. "Walk away," she said steadily, "or this water finds your face." There was a pause. Bryce stepped forward anyway. Marcus fired a warning shot inches from his boot. Bryce flinched. "You got guts. Fine. But guts don't stop bullets." Then, as he lunged, Isabel hurled the boiling water. Not at him, but at the dirt, blinding him in a cloud of hot steam. Marcus swung the rifle stock hard. Bryce stumbled, a gash blooming across his forehead. Blood met dust. "You'll regret this," Bryce hissed, backing away, eyes wild. "You don't get to win. You already lost," Isabel said, eyes blazing. "We're not yours. We never were." Bryce vanished into the trees. Later that night, in silence, Marcus dug up a tin box buried beneath the old stone marker on Cherokee ground. Inside was the original deed, signed before state lines had meaning, when the land answered only to honor. 3 days later, in a courtroom lit by morning sun, Marcus laid down the deed. If the law can't make room for what's right, he told the judge, it's no law at all. And this time, Isabel stood behind him not as someone who needed protection, but as someone who had already proven she could fight to protect him. The judge, a stern man with tired eyes, looked at the yellowed paper, tracing the federal stamp and old signature. "This land's protected," the judge said, voice low. "Pre-territorial rights cannot be reclaimed without a full hearing." Marcus nodded. "And my family stays. All of them." Bryce burst into the chamber moments later, bandaged and angry. "You think an old paper changes anything?" But behind him, 2 marshals stepped in. One carried a warrant. 4 trafficking minors under false contracts, the lead marshal said, and assault. Bryce lunged. The marshals didn't flinch. Steel met wrist. He hit the floor in chains. Outside, Isabel stood with the children. When Marcus stepped out, she met him with tired eyes and a question unspoken. He nodded once. "It's done." Weeks passed after the courthouse ruling, but the air around the stone ranch stayed thick with tension, as if justice had only borrowed time. Summer tiptoed in slow then fast, heating the soil, drying the streams, and bringing with it a silence too still to trust. Then one morning, Marcus stepped outside and looked up. The first signs came with the color of the sky yellow, gray, and angry, like the land itself was getting ready to breathe dust. Marcus knew what was coming. He had lived through 2 sandstorms in his lifetime. The third would not show mercy just because he had something to lose now. He moved fast. He pulled the animals into the lower barn, shut the house windows, double-checked every latch and rope. Isabel gathered the children, shoving blankets under the door cracks, boiling water in case someone choked on dust. The wind rose like a freight train, and the prairie disappeared in a blur of grit and thunder. Then came the roar. It slammed the ranch like a fist. Boards creaked, nails screamed, the air outside turned to stone and sand, and somewhere in the chaos, the cattle broke loose. Marcus ran before anyone could stop him. He vanished into the storm with a rope, a lantern, and the curse of a man who knew loss too well to let it happen again. It took 40 minutes before he came back. He stumbled through the front door, bloody at the temple, shirt ripped across the back. The lantern was gone. The rope had burned his hands raw, but all 3 cattle were tied to the post outside. Isabel caught him as he fell to his knees. They moved him to the bed. The children huddled at the far end of the room, eyes wide and quiet. Isabel cleaned his wounds with boiled water, then covered him in every blanket they had. The wind still screamed, but inside she began to hum. It was a song from Chihuahua, soft, circular, full of soil and memory. The lullaby her grandmother used to sing during storms when tin roofs shook and fear tried to crawl under your skin. Marcus didn't speak, but his breathing calmed. At the far end of the barn, the children went to work. Under Isabel's direction, they mixed clay and water in an old trough. Anna and Diego carried buckets. Rosa held the nails, and Miguel, the boy who had never touched Marcus without flinching, pressed mud against the barn wall with small, determined hands. By midnight, the wind began to fade. Morning broke through cracks in the shutters, pale and— Marcus, you gave us safety. You gave me more than any man ever did with just your silence and your steadiness. But the world does not forget people like me, and it will not forgive you for keeping us. I'd rather be gone than ruin you. Take care of them. They are more than I ever deserved. Thank you for letting me pretend, just for a while, that I belonged. Isabel *. Next to it sat Diego's drawing, a crude map marked with a star near an old river crossing, the route traced in pencil toward the border. Marcus didn't think. He just grabbed his coat, wincing from the bruises still healing on his side, and got his horse ready. The prairie was dry again, dust lifting with every hoof beat. He rode hard, faster than he should, heart racing like it had not in years. At the edge of the ridge, where wind snapped through the gulch, he saw her walking alone. One bag slung over her shoulder, head down, shoulders tight like she was getting ready for another goodbye. He got off his horse roughly, the horse crying out behind him. Isabel. She turned. Her face was already wet with tears. You're bleeding, she said, running toward him. You're leaving, he answered. She looked away. I thought if I just disappeared, it would be easier. For who? For everyone. Marcus stepped closer. Slow. He pulled something from his coat pocket. A silver ring dulled by time. The band was worn, the stone long gone. This was hers, he said. My wife. I buried the match with our son. But this. He held it out, resting it in her palm. She'd want you to stay. Isabel stared at it, fingers closing around the metal like it could stop her heart from breaking. Then she dropped her bag and stepped forward, arms wrapping around Marcus's middle, face pressed to his chest. He didn't flinch. He held her like he was afraid she'd vanish again. I'm not your wife, she whispered. No, he said, voice low. But you're the reason I still know how to breathe. When they returned, the children met them at the gate. Anna ran and buried her face in Isabel's skirt. Miguel held on to her sleeve. Diego gave Marcus a look, not one of questions, but quiet understanding. Inside the house, Marcus sat at the table. He unfolded the letter again. His voice shook only once. I'd rather be gone than ruin you. He looked at the children, then Isabel. You're why I'm alive. Outside, the prairie wind stirred dust into little spirals. But inside that old mended house, the air was still and full of something steady. 1 year passed. The prairie had changed its colors again, dry wheat to green, green to gold. The wind still roamed freely, but it sang less sharply through the rebuilt beams of the stone ranch. The barn stood straight with new nails and old stories. The porch had a fresh coat of paint, and on the front gate, carved deep into solid cedar, were the words that mattered most. The story was complete, but the carving remained unfinished in Marcus's mind, a promise that some things were worth the wait, worth the work, worth the risk of calling them home.